years, and you could even say that I'm still walking in this, like even right now, even like this morning, few minutes before coming up here. But I want to tell a story. So, oh, this is like so embarrassing. So if you guys know me, like I'm 22, which is like kind of old, I guess. That's not that old, right? 22, and it's a little bit old to some people, but lately, like because maybe it's getting colder in the winter, but I feel like when I wake up, everything kind of hurts. Like I don't know if that's just me or if some of you guys might relate, but sometimes you wake up and like your knees start hurting and like my elbows, like my shoulders are like so tense and they're like hurting. I don't know. Maybe it's just something that happens with getting older, or maybe I just need to stretch more. I don't know. But it sparked like a funny like story that I had. So where's Celine? Is Celine in here? So me and Celine like were going to the gym a lot, like in the summer of 20 something, 20 COVID, like during that time. And this is like very funny because during that time we still had Zoom University. So your classes were online and like no one was forcing you to get up. Honestly, in some of my classes, I can graduate now. I already graduated, so I can say this now. Like, your Zoom laptop would be like right next to you in your bed, camera off, audio off. Like sometimes you'd be there. Sometimes you'd fall asleep because it's like 9 a.m. You'd go fall back asleep. But that was me. But me and Celine, one thing we wanted to do was like, we were like, hey, you know what? Like, let's go to the gym, like super early in the morning, because why not? And if you guys have been to the gym, which some of you guys, I guess you guys go to the gym a lot. I don't know. Like, obviously, I'm like kind of small, right? So like everything in the gym is like bigger than me. The machines, like everything is pretty heavy. Even like the chairs, like the benches. There you go. Thank you. The benches and all the machines, they're like pretty heavy to lift. And so me and Celine were, hey Celine. So me and Celine were like at the gym, and then we were trying to like do a workout on the benches or something. And all of a sudden, of course, me being very clumsy, I trip and I completely fall over. Like if you guys know the gym is like open, like big room like this, right? Completely fall over, almost like flat on my face. And all of a sudden, I hear and I feel like my knee kind of like pop out of place. Yeah. No, the faces and the way I felt was like, it was terrible. And then, and I tried to play it off so cool in front of Celine. Like, I was trying to be like, no, it didn't hurt. Like, I'm totally fine. Like, let's keep going. Like, I don't even know if I think we tried to like do something else or maybe just like walk on the treadmill. But after like a minute, I was like, yeah, let's go home. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, let's leave. And I was in so much pain. And believe it or not, this is not the first time that I have done something to my knee already. Like, if you guys also know, like, years ago, like pre-COVID, I sprained my knee dancing at church. If you guys remember. But like if you know, you know, because I didn't even sprain it dancing like tambourine or banner. I sprained it like doing some random dance like in the middle of practice, and all of a sudden like Go Jeff is like wheelchairing me out of the church, and I'm like rushed to Methodist. It was insane. It was really funny. But my point is ever since then I've had like issues with my knees. So like, like the song is like weak knees weak, mom spaghetti, whatever. That's literally me. Like weak knees, that's me. Like ever since then. Yeah, and this is like a funny story. It's funny now, but literally the day after, I didn't do anything about it. Like for about a few days, and then like Cecile took me to like the ER. I was like 20 years old going to CHOP, and they were like pretty much trying to kick me out by that point. And I even went to like, I think it was like Gisel's like 8th grade graduation at the time. Like it was a long time ago, and I didn't think anything was wrong with it, right? But I was feeling so weak, and my knees was obviously in so much pain, but I just didn't do anything about it. And it's a funny story now to laugh at. At the time, it wasn't funny, and I know I'm talking like. My point is, what I want to talk about today is weakness. Can everyone say weakness? And I'm like talking about a funny story. I would love to hear if you guys have like also funny stories about like, well, not funny. Like it's probably like not wrong to say funny, but if you guys have like crazy like funny now stories about like you fell and like you had to like, as a kid I always wanted to have like what's it called? The thingy that like people always sign when you're in like middle school, a cast. I really wanted one of those because I was like, that is so cool. I remember in middle school, like Judah, I think had one at one point, and it's like it's cool because everyone's just like, sign my cast, sign my cast. Anyways, I want to talk about weakness. Maybe some of you guys today are feeling like me. You feel physically weak. Maybe some of you guys today feel spiritually weak. Maybe some of you guys are like, oh, like, and what does it even mean to be spiritually strong, right? Like maybe some of you guys are like, oh, I really don't want to show up to church today. My face and my body is just here, but like mentally I'm not here. Maybe that's some of you guys, you know? Or maybe you're emotionally weak. Like people have just been getting on my last nerves. Like I just got in an argument with this person, or these friendships are all falling apart, or like I don't know where I am in life. Maybe that's you, you know? Maybe you're feeling spiritually weak, physically weak, emotionally weak, so on and so forth. But I wanted to talk about that weakness today, right? I wanted to talk about what we do when we're feeling weak and what I've learned. Because lately, if I'm being honest, like I've been feeling weak too. Like I want to be present so bad and I want to be here, but things in life have just been knocking you down, you know? One thing that I wanted to emphasize about weakness is that weakness is not like a hall pass, quote unquote, for us to just cruise in this Christian life and to make excuses for not showing up. You know, for people who are feeling maybe like this is a dry season for them, but intentionally like going to church and knowing the gospel, knowing what you should do, but like willingly choose to turn the other way, choose to fall into sin. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who are day in and day out trying their best to follow God, trying their best to change their life, change their habits. Maybe you've been far from God and you're trying to come to community, so you're here today. Maybe you feel like, oh, I have bad habits, like I curse, or maybe you're like, I watch something that I shouldn't, or I do something I shouldn't. You're trying so hard, but you still have that weakness. That's what I'm talking about. The people who are day in and day out trying to follow God, but still have weaknesses, because we all do, right? So that's what I want to share about. 3 things that I've learned, and I'm learning right now, been learning a lot this week about weakness. The title of my sharing today is Weak Flesh and Bones. Hey, that's kind of cool. Weak flesh and bones. Can everyone say that? Weak flesh and bones. Tell your neighbor, you got weak flesh and bones? Exactly. All right, then. All right, the first point about what I've been learning about our weaknesses, the first one is that Jesus invites us to be weak. Tell your neighbor, Jesus is inviting you today. Jesus is inviting you to be weak. And it might sound kind of weird, like, what do you mean Jesus wants us to be weak? But let's explain. Let's open up to scripture, shall we? Jesus would never ask us, before we read this, Jesus would never ask us to go through something and walk through something in our lives that he didn't experience first. Amen? Like if you guys have, I'm sure all of us are like Sunday school veterans, you know, like we've read so many Bible stories. We know all about Jesus' life. We mostly know about the miracles he did, the great works he's done, you know, the people that he's helped. But we don't take the moment to dissect and really focus on his life and like what he went through while he was here on earth. And so this is Hebrews, and the writer of Hebrews is basically expressing to us like how Jesus understands and sympathizes with what we go through. Okay, so Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 15. Can we read this all together? I think it'll wake some of us up. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Amen. What I wanted to highlight from these 2 verses alone is the word sympathize. Verse 15 says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Everyone say sympathize. And I feel like the word sympathize, empathize is kind of like thrown around and we don't really understand what it means. Like most of the time when you think of someone sympathizing with your situations, you think of like someone coddling you, right? Like someone just being like, oh, it's okay. Like if you're going, which is, you know, necessary. If you're telling someone about a tough time you're going through, or you're sharing maybe in your AGLs and people are sympathizing with you, a lot of times the most they can do is say, hey, I'm here for you. Like I hear you. But they don't actually know what you're going through because they've never, experienced what you experience. But what's important here, like what I want to mention is the Greek word for sympathize means to co-suffer, which means to suffer alongside you. And what the writer in Hebrews is saying here is like, we don't have a high priest, someone who, like a God that's far away, who doesn't understand what we're going through. But we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with us because he has co-suffered with us, right? Like, if you guys don't know, and I'm sure most of us do, but like the greatest way that Jesus co-suffered with us is by dying on the cross for us, is by giving up his life to be here so that we could be here. Like when Jesus invites us to be weak, the truth is like we always strive our best to put our best foot forward in life, but sometimes like God doesn't even want your definition of best. Like we try so hard to show up and just to fake it till you make it, or if you don't feel good, you're like, well, then I'm not going to show up, or we just like let our emotions and affect our attitudes because we think that's what we should do. We think that should be our best. But like, what is actually God's definition of your best? Maybe it's exactly where you are right now. If you can only give 50%, if you can only just show up to be here, or if you only can go show up to school even though you're like, what is school even for these days? Or you're like suffering because maybe like it's like mid-November. I know a lot of y'all are seniors going through like college applications, or maybe you guys are going through Drexel students like co-op, like things of uncertainty, right? Feeling weak. Maybe it's busy life. It's just busy. Schedule's just busy for you guys right now. Like Jesus is inviting us to be weak with him because he has been weak as well. And he's suffered through it. And he still does suffer through it with us. Like we can be weak because Jesus defeated the ultimate weakness of sin and of death. Like even in the Bible, if you guys know like the story of when Jesus was tempted, he suffered not only physically but also spiritually as well. Like he was tempted by Satan after 40 days of fasting to, Satan tempted him with 3 different temptations, right? Like he was hungry after 40 days, I'm sure, because he was also fully God and fully human. Satan was like, oh, like if you can make this stone into bread, that's physical weakness, right? He's hungry. If you can make the stone into bread, then like that will prove that you're the one true God. Or if you can fall off of the cliff and the angels will lift you up, that'll prove that you're the one true God. Or if you bow down to me, that's what Satan said, right? He was like, if you bow down to me and worship me, then like I will give you everything. That was a spiritual weakness and the spiritual temptation that Jesus had, yet he did it all without sin. That's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Like, even when we feel weak, we have to understand that Jesus is also inviting us to be weak with him. That leads me to the second part, which is weakness forces us to be dependent and not independent. Can we all say that together? 1, 2, 3. Weakness forces us to be dependent and not independent, right? Let's open up to another verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. So I have like context to give here, right? So there's a guy named Paul, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about him, but Paul was basically, he wrote a lot of the New Testament. He didn't write it from like his bedroom or like from like, a study room in like his university or from like the convenience of like wherever we do a lot of our work. He wrote a lot of the New Testament from a prison cell. Like, how worse could it get? The conditions that he was in. It really couldn't have gotten more worse. Yet the things he wrote and the things he wrote to the early churches were so encouraging that it's like you almost can't believe it. You almost can't not believe it, If he could write it while he was sitting in a jail cell and still talking about the goodness of God, like that should show us that even when we're feeling so weak and we're like at our rock bottom, there's still hope. So for context, Paul basically he was first Saul, first a man who didn't love God, didn't love Jesus, didn't believe in Jesus, persecuted Christians all the time, wanted Christians to basically not keep proclaiming the gospel. But then God changed his life, he redeemed his life, and then he was living his life for God, and he was truly, truly on fire for God, And it's so interesting to me how he even wrote and admitted, like, if you want to read, like, at home, I encourage you guys to read, like, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Like, Paul says a lot of really good things here. But basically what's happening is Paul had a vision. Like, he got a dream or a vision, like, from God. And it was like a revelation about paradise and about heaven. And it was something so glorious and so, like, amazing, you know. And he wanted to obviously share that with people, right? He wanted to share. But the issue of sharing that with people is that he didn't want what he shared and what he boasted about to reflect himself. He didn't want, like, the vision and the dream that he had to just make himself look good. So that's why, and because of that, like, God gave him, like, a thorn. A thorn, you could also call it a weakness. Something that was in his flesh, something that we don't know what it was. Like, Paul didn't mention it. But he had this thorn in his flesh. And let's read about this thorn, okay? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. All right, let's read it together. 1, 2, 3. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content in my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Amen. So there's a lot of things to note here. Like, because Paul had, like, this great revelation, this great joy about paradise, you know, for some of you guys, maybe it looks different. Maybe some of you have, like, great news about where you're going to college. Maybe some of you guys have a new job, or you did so well on that test. Or maybe life is just looking like cloud 9 for you right now. This is actually how Paul was too. And in order to prevent Paul from becoming independent of needing God's help and God's strength, this is what happened. And it said 3 times I pleaded with the Lord, which is interesting to me because, like, you know, like, if you ask, like, your parents or something, maybe they'll be like, oh, like, if it's something reasonable or if it's something that is hurting you or making you suffer, most likely they will give it to you, right? Or they'll help you. Or if it's a friend that's in need, your friend is like, hey, I really need your help. Or maybe, like, for me, a lot of times when I'm in help and need help from my friends, it's usually like a FaceTime call. Like, you know, it'll be like midnight or it'll be like really late. And I'm like, hey, I need help. Can you call for a sec? Can we talk? That's the way, like, the help that I need, right? Most of the times, if they're not sleeping or if they're a good friend, they'll answer the first time. They'll answer right away. But Paul here is saying, like, I pleaded with God 3 times. So not just once, not just twice, but I kept asking God, God, help me with this. God, take this thorn away from me. God, take this weakness away from me. But instead of God being like, okay, here's the easy way out. Let me just take the thorn out. Some of us might think, like, oh, that's so rude. Like, why didn't he just, like, help him and, like, take the thorn out? Look what it says here in verse 9. The way God answered to Paul wasn't like, I will just take you out of your situation so you can be independent from me. But what he says was, I want you to be dependent on me. He says, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. That's what he said. So it's not about, like, a lot of times it's not about us. Like, I know it's hard to think about, and this is kind of, like, not the most happy, cheerful topic to talk about on a Sunday. But, like, I know that if I'm going through this too and, like, learning a lot about weakness in my life, maybe someone else in here is too, you know. Maybe someone else really needs to hear this. But the truth is, like, sometimes it's not about us. Like, if we take a step back and really think about, like, why we're facing so many difficulties and why we feel like we just can't do it on our own, maybe, like, that's the point. Like, God doesn't want you to do it on your own. He doesn't want you to do it without him. And he's not going to just remove you from the situation that you're in that's hard. He's not going to remove you from the friends that are giving you a hard time, from the schoolwork that's giving you a hard time, or from the family that's giving you a hard time just because you ask him. But he wants you to rely on him. He wants you to be dependent on him. And I think another thing that's important, the next part that Paul goes, for the sake of Christ that I'm content in my weakness. A little bit before that he goes, therefore I will boast more gladly of my weaknesses. For in my weakness the power of Christ is made full. Now it's important to know here, like, that boasting about our weakness should not become this false humility that we have, but rather it should point to God's power, right? So like there's a difference between complaining about our weaknesses and just like trying to tell everybody, like posting it on your Instagram story, posting it on your laps, when you're like in a dire need of help. Like imagine if you like got a flat tire, all you did was just post it on your laps or post it on your story. Like that's not gonna help you, okay? But imagine like this boasting that Paul's talking about is like you could translate boasting into like bragging or like just proudly telling about. The boasting is not supposed to reflect us. It shouldn't be, wow, look at me, like, I'm so sad, like, I'm going through this trouble. Even though, like, a lot of times, that's, like, how we want it to be, right? Because we want that comfort. We want to be coddled. We want our friends and our family and people around us to, like, comfort us, which is not bad. Like, it's good. But ultimately, in our weaknesses, if all we're seeking for is validation from other people, if all we're seeking for is, like, trying to put on this false humility persona, even if you're not like intentionally trying to, if we're not careful about leaning on God in our weakness, that's what it will become. It's easy for people to like say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that, and like, how can I be there for you? And that's like as far as it goes. But if we really let God into our lives and into our weaknesses and be with us and be dependent on Him, that's when we're able to overcome the weakness with God, even though He might not take you out of the situation right away, which is honestly a really hard pill to swallow. Being dependent on community, being dependent on people that you really trust, that love God and also love you. That's the most important thing. So I feel like I went by this really fast, but my last point, about weaknesses and what I want to tell you guys today, especially for everyone who's here in the room today. The third point is that showing up is enough. Tell your neighbor, showing up is enough. Tell them, I'm glad you're here today. The truth is when we step into this building, when we step into church, most of the time we don't know what everybody is going through in their life. Like even if it's your best friend or even if it's like friends that you're sitting next to that you feel really close to, you really don't know what they're going through, right? You really don't know. So the next thing that I want to talk about with weakness is like showing up is enough. Like God is not asking us to put on a fake smile in front of people. And I know that's how it feels sometimes, right? You walk into church and everyone's like greeting you in the front and you want to be like so smiley and so happy. And maybe you feel like, oh, I really can't show up today, so I'm just not going to come. That's what you shouldn't do. I literally felt this way yesterday because, like, we had Friendsgiving and I knew Friendsgiving was going to be such a fun time because, everyone being here together, us eating and having fun, it was fun. But I've been having a lot of weaknesses in my life lately, in like this past week even, with my relationships with people in my life, like my family and sometimes friends too. Like relationships are hard, like friendships are hard, family is tough. And yesterday I was definitely in a weak spot. And it's so funny how like the enemy will try to get you in a weak spot right before you're supposed to serve or right before you're supposed to show up on a Sunday or right when you should be depending on God the most. The enemy will literally try to get a foothold in your life. They'll try to bring busyness into your life, bring distractions into your life, bring people who probably shouldn't be there into your life, But yesterday I was like, should I was like, obviously I can't just not go to Friendsgiving, but like I guess I technically could. I'll just tell people like I'm going through it, and like make that as my excuse, and like no one will probably question it. But I was like talking to like a few friends, and one of them was just like, just show up. You never know what's gonna happen, Like just show up and let the rest of the night take you wherever. That sounds like it went somewhere like farther, like not what it should have. Let the night take you, but just show up, and just be yourself. Like don't pretend to be anybody else. If you're not having the best day, if you're not smiling all day, and if maybe you are, like, that's fine, that's okay. The most important thing is that you show up. And, they were right, and yesterday we all had a blast at Friendsgiving. All right, I'm going to stop talking about Friendsgiving. Let's open up to Hebrews. We're going to continue chapter 4. We read 14 and 15, now we're going to read verse 16. This is what the writer is telling us, continuing on from what we read earlier. Let's read it all together. Ready? I need everybody's help. 1, 2, 3. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and help in time of need. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this verse says, let us then with confidence. Everyone say confidence. None of y'all said that with confidence. Try it again. Say confidence. There you go. See, there you go. Come on. With confidence. Another word for confidence is boldness. Let us draw near to the throne of grace. The throne of grace being Jesus, sitting at the right hand of God. Let us draw near to him with confidence that we may receive the mercy and find the grace in the time of need. Let us with privilege approach this. One of the most destructive lies that the enemy will try to tell you is that when you feel weak, the enemy will lie to you and tell you that you should believe that you are alone and that you should hide. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that before. Like the story I just shared, like when you're feeling weak, the first thing the enemy will tell you right away, and you're like, you didn't even realize that was the enemy, or you didn't realize that was like a thought that was like tempting you, is like, oh, just don't go. Or, oh, just don't show up to that hangout. Or, oh, just don't go to meet up with those friends. Or, oh, just bail on those plans. Or, don't spend time with God like you have tomorrow. Like God's going to forgive you anyways. That's what our natural instinct is to do, is to run and to hide. But here in Hebrews, it's saying the exact opposite. Can we go back to that verse? Thank you. It's saying, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace. Don't hide. Don't isolate yourself. Like, I'm standing up here telling you guys this because I've experienced it, and I continually experience it, like, day in and day out, whether it's work. Sometimes it's hard to get out of bed, and currently I'm in a job that's, like, remote, so it's, like, work from home. It's, like, Zoom University all over again. And personally, I don't thrive working from home because I'm such a social butterfly. Like, I like to talk to people, and I like to be around people. So sometimes when I'm feeling tired and I'm feeling lazy, I just don't get up till, like, later than I should, And the easy thing to do is, like, just hide or just isolate or not even show up. Even in AGLs, like midweek, right? I know for a lot of you guys in AGL, it's like after school, after work. It's hard and it's tiring and you don't want to show up. Maybe sometimes people disappoint, and, like, even on behalf of AGL also, like, we're not perfect either. And sometimes maybe you come in with expectations and it's not what you thought it was, or X, Y, and Z, and it's easier to just not show up, right? But, yeah, like, the one thing that I've been really, like, it's been pounding on my heart all week is to just not isolate and to not hide and go hide, because that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do, but that's exactly what God doesn't want us to do.